So, welcome to the presentation on the historical evolution of management thought. So, in this lecture, we are going to trace the origins of management starting from the ancient times. So, here we will look at the possibility of management thought taking roots in ancient civilizations. So, we will see some examples from the Mesopotamia civilization to Indian and Chinese civilizations. Then we will discuss about the evolution of management theory, taking clue from the ancient civilizations. So, what kind of models are were practiced in the ancient past, and how many of them continue to be followed and practiced till date. Then we will look into the Industrial Revolution and the foundation of management. So, here we will introduce how Britain emerged as an industrial power in the early 18th century and moving on to 19th century. So, we will see the origins of Industrial Revolution in Britain and how the foundation of management was laid during that era. So, we will discuss about the contributions of Adam Smith, so who is now known as the father of economics. So, we will see his contributions to both economics as well as the management thought. This will be followed by a discussion in detail on the schools of management, the classical human relations and modern systems theories. So, here we will be portraying a biographical sketch of management thinkers and philosophers who contributed to the evolution of the management theory in greater detail. So, we will discuss about their major contributions and how it enriched modern management. So, that will be the second part of this presentation. So, let us start with the ancient origins of management. So, here we can see the entire ancient civilizational timeline from Mesopotamia to Roman Empire. So, if you look at Mesopotamia, which is currently around Iran, Iraq and other parts of Syria and so on. So, Mesopotamia portrays the civilization portrays the earliest written records of trade and also labor management. So, this includes Akkadian civilization, Babylonian civilization, and there is also the world's first documented code, a kind of law called Hammurabi. Hammurabi was the king who codified the norms of a civilized society. So, that is one of the earliest records available from the ancient times. So, this is followed by the next instance, the Egyptian pyramids. So, the great Egyptian pyramids involved at least a lakh of workers who spent considerable amount of time building these great monuments for the pharaohs. The pharaohs were the kings of Egypt. We'll also see how such huge monuments were built and what kind of organization existed behind the success of these kind of construction projects. There is also this discussion about Sun Tzu. So, Sun Tzu, the Chinese general who wrote this book, The Art of War, one of the earliest records of espionage and military strategy. So even today, the business warfare draws lessons from Sun Tzu's Art of War. So close to the publication of this great work, so we have in India Ardhashastra. So Ardhashastra by Kautilya, also known as Chanakya, is one of the world's greatest documentation of statecraft, public administration, and also military strategy. And the art of spying, espionage, is also discussed in great detail in this work, Ardhashastra. So now then we have the Buddhist viharas around 300 BCE. So Buddhist viharas initially started as resting places for tourists and later evolved into monasteries for Buddhist monks. Again, these viharas later they evolved into Mahaviharas. So Nalanda is one of the greatest examples of a Mahavihara. So not only they are spiritual centers, they were also great centers of learning. That brings us to the next greatest achievement by Rome. So the military administrative management at a scale which lasted for more than close to 1500 years is one of the remarkable achievements of Roman civilization. So these are some of the examples which we can draw to understand how management took roots in many cultures and civilizations across the globe. So these civilizations not only created some kind of mental frameworks for us to understand how those civilizations flourished during that time and how they leave us lasting lessons to draw from. So let us quickly take a recap of the Egyptian civilization that created those great pyramids way back around 2600 BCE. So this great monuments, you can look at the numbers. So over 1 lakh workers with a lot of coordination between the teams work daily for 20 years. That is the duration of the project. To achieve this great monumental construction, they followed a 5-tier structure which is hierarchical in nature. So if you look at the management practices which were prevalent during those times, it includes many of today's modern terms like division of labor, hierarchy and reporting, resource planning, and also record keeping. So imagine such huge numbers of people who were involved in constructing great pyramids. So they need to be specialized. So there are many specialists. Some were quarriers, some were transporters, some were masons. So all these people, they had their own specializations. They formed what were known as worker gangs, and each of these worker gangs competed with another so that efficiency can be achieved in building those great pyramids. So specialized working teams is one of the main features under division of labor as a management team. The hierarchical reporting, so we said there is a 5-tier hierarchy. So from the king, pharaoh, followed by vizier, so later on became wazir. There are overseers like supervisors, foremen, and workers. So these 5 layers, you can find similar structures in modern corporates. Then of course there's a lot of resource planning that should happen. That includes creating reliable supply chains without any interruption of work. And the whole transportation happened through waterways, through river close by. This involved bringing huge boulders, limestone, so which are all needed for the construction of the pyramids. So there are a lot of planning that goes into it and in sustaining the supply chain operations. Finally, the record keeping. So they need to keep track of the project. So there are some amount of documentation on the quotas, the wages paid to the uh, people who worked on this project, and the status is also documented, the status of the project itself. So there is also a common myth that the workers were all slaves, but the Egyptologists and historians later established that the pyramids were not constructed by slaves. These are all paid workers. They found evidence of the tombs being made for the workers and their supervisors. So that and workers were also taken care. Their healthcare needs were also addressed. For accidents, there were physicians addressing to the workers' requirements regarding health. So all this shows us the construction management behind the pyramid was built on many of the management teams currently practiced today. So the business implications, one is the hierarchical structure, second one project planning, and third workforce specialization. So as we said, these continue to form the bedrock foundation of modern construction and also manufacturing management. Now we'll take a look at the achievements of Indian Buddhist viharas way back in 300 BCE. So again, here we need to appreciate that the management principles were always discovered time and again, whether it is ancient times or modern times. So many of the principles still hold good. So the monasteries had a code, and this code governed the daily life of the monks. Very clear roles and responsibilities were assigned to the monks, starting from the abbot, treasurer, storekeeper, guest master who dealt with visitors. And there is financial bookkeeping for the donations received. And the decision making was a lot more democratic. So there were sanghas, which were councils to come to consensus regarding certain policies and any decisions that affects the life of the monks are all undertaken through these councils in a very democratic manner. And finally, there is also resource allocation to manage food and also the donations, both in terms of the land or even the kind of currencies that existed at that point of time. So they were all handled centrally in the vihara. So the next one is about the Chinese dynasties. There are two major achievements during that era, so 500 BCE. The one, the imperial bureaucracy that was founded on merit-based civil service exam. This also forms the basis for later British civil services and Indian civil services. This is the world's earliest known examinations conducted on, say, Confucius philosophy or Taoism, which guided the civil service exams conducted during the Chinese dynasty's times. And the second major achievement is Sun Tzu's Art of War, which documented military strategy, intelligence, and the kind of flexibility which form the bedrock foundation for achieving success in the battles. Then the granary systems were also evolved, which were centralized, and this kind of centralization helped the dynasties to manage calamities like droughts very efficiently. The Silk Road, which connected China to Europe, these were roads that carried the world trade. So both China and India were supplying their goods, and they both made use of these silk roads that connected Asia and Europe. So again, this emanates from the China. So that's how Chinese dynasties, they created lasting management teams for us to contemplate and learn from. So there are, by having an understanding of how the earlier civilizations during ancient times conducted their day-to-day affairs and also created civilizational themes to draw from, it tells us there is something universal about management. Whether it is ancient times or modern times, a few things remains the same. For example, the hierarchy which continues to be followed till date. So the layered authority structures that helps us to manage the coordination mechanism, especially when the companies or institutions grow. So to manage the scale of operations, some amount of hierarchical layering structure will always be helpful. And there is a division of labor. So they trying to find specializations which form teams and groups. So that helps us to divide labor so as to increase efficiency and also improve quality. So the division of labor with specialization of roles is a key thing which we will come across across all the ancient civilizations. Then of course the resource record keeping and resource allocation, they go hand in hand. So again, whether it is building a monument or managing a monastery, so both record keeping and resource allocation play a very crucial role. So how do you go about creating the code of conduct and rules and norms for behavior? So these are quite important to create a semblance of discipline among the ranks. So today we call them as roles and responsibilities which are clearly defined across the organizations. So what we see today was also practiced in the ancient past. Finally, the delegation. So when the organizations grow, there is amount of delegation which should be distributed from higher levels to lower levels. So this is quite an important aspect so that the coordination between the teams can be effectively achieved when we have the right amount of delegation.